Anyone who's followed the channel for a decent amount of time will know that I really don't trash cars that often. So when I do, it kind of stands out. Stuff like the Chrome Line cars in Gran Turismo 6. This one was the only vehicle out of the 6 this time around in GT7 that I did trash in my first impressions. I am so glad to be able to say that as trashy as it is in my opinion in standard form, it's so much better when you fettle it through tuning. And of course that's the difference between the first impressions video and the review. It gives us that time in between to see how the car initially feels in its standard form, and then see what you can do with it. What can it give you in terms of working with it, for speed, for cornering ability, for parts, etc. And like I said, I'm so glad to be able to say that this is a vast improvement once you start to change stuff around, especially of course when it comes to the suspension and the diff in particular. It's wildly better than it was to begin with. Now, there's a caveat there. The asterisk is that this is still never going to be one of my most used Group 1s for pretty much the same two reasons as most, if not all, of the other Vision GTs are never my most used Group 1s either. Number one, they just don't feel that authentic. I would much rather drive an iconic Group C or LMP car because, I mean, not only are they just naturally better, but they feel more right, more correct, and less gimmicky. The second thing though is, well, more often than not, I just don't find the Group 1 Vision GT cars to be as good. For handling, they always feel a bit weighty, a bit too heavy through corners. They feel like they're kind of trying to stick around with the cool kids, but they shouldn't really be there. And the Group C era, GT1s, LMPs, these are just such iconic cars which legitimately are that good. They are real world race winners. These cars aren't. They're fictional and then they're bumped up to that level. It's a cool idea if you can pull it off, but some of them just don't. And even with the tuning applied, that doesn't take away from the fact that this car does feel, and I hate to say it because I do like Genesis, I love the normal version of this car. I think it's a stunning looking design exercise, and I love what Genesis is doing with their performance wing, the whole magma line, having the orange as their like key colour for those cars. I love it. It's great to see. I'm glad for them. In the case of this car though, I had high hopes for it, which is probably part of the problem. I really thought this could be a weapon, and well, it kind of is, but it also isn't at the same time. This is a weapon in as much as a dragster is, in a straight line, and that's about it, at least in standard form. Thankfully, when you do apply tuning to it, as I said earlier on, you can improve things through corners, but even then, I would recommend going into this car, if you haven't driven it yet, with the expectations of something like a Nissan GT-R Nismo, or a Panos from the older games, the GT-R1, because that car, as I mentioned again in my overall thoughts for the update, could race against them, but it didn't feel like it should be there. And that was honestly Polyphony's fault, because in real life it was a top tier contender at Le Mans, didn't win of course, but they made it way too heavy and it was just under pace. Lister Storm had the same problem in racing form in the later games. This feels like that, but it feels also like that Nissan, wherein the Nissan has great specs, really cool different ideas, but in real life, and for the most part in the game, it just doesn't have the pace. There's no point in having that crazy power if you can't actually get the power down. And in the case of this one, that to me is exactly how it feels. You can make it stupid fast, and here at Le Mans, it feels at home, because it's a perfect track for it. I mean, of course it feels good here. You've got crazy straight lines, fantastic top-end speed, of course it's going to feel good, but then through corners, you compare it to the footage that I took of this on the Nürburgring against Sophie, the car looks like it's just struggling so much, and I'm constantly fighting against it. And again, of course, that's pre and post tuning, so it's not an entirely fair comparison, but still it is the same car that we're working with. I haven't affected the weight or the power or even the tyres, so it's close enough to be a comparison. It does go to show that thankfully you can save this car, but I'm never going to put it as one of my absolute top tier picks. And I feel like as far as critiquing cars go, it's a bit of a cop-out to do it to Vision GTs, which is another reason why I actively try not to do that generally, because everyone seems to dog on them. A few of us really love the program, or at least what it should be capable of, but it seems like a lot of companies, and I don't really think this is Polyphony's fault to be honest, it seems like a lot of companies get really lazy. They have some cool looking designs, but then they all go down the same kind of, oh, it's fully electric, or it's a hybrid with 3 motors on the front end and active aero. Like, oh, we haven't seen that before. So many of the cars though end up feeling like just design advertisements for the next era of the cars. From a business perspective, it makes sense. But as I've mentioned before, that's a double-edged sword, because yes, if you make the car look cool, you will attract more younger people and folks in general to looking at your brand. But for those of us who actually see these cars regularly, aka the people playing the game, if the memory that you're going to be left with is not, oh, that's a pretty car, but it's actually, oh, that's a pig to drive, it's actually kind of counterintuitive to what you were hoping to achieve with said advertising. So in the case of the normal version, ironically, I think it's kind of a better vehicle for giving you positive vibes about Genesis than this one is. This one needed to pick up the baton from the normal version and run with it, and it needed to be good. It needed to be undeniably good, and it just isn't. It's workable, and that's about the biggest credit I can give the car. You can make it just about good enough to consider using it, and that's the highest praise I can give, and that's such a shame. I already mentioned how weird it is that this is heavier than the normal version. I know that's not unheard of in racing, but still it comes off as very weird. Thankfully it's only 1,000,000 credits, so it does undercut a lot of the legendary stuff on price. That's pretty much the only advantage it has over a lot of them. And moving on from just my thoughts, I did see a couple of people mention that they thought in particular the brakes on this one were way better than the normal Vision GT, which, I mean, A, you would hope so, being a full-on race car with more downforce, you know, better aero and more powerful brakes. So yeah, like I said, it would be far more odd if it didn't have better brakes, but yes, I will agree. They are significantly better, and they are at least good enough to once again have enough pace to compete. I will say that for me though, this car feels like it sits squarely in the camp of being really good against AI Group 1 cars, and even then, only on the right track. This is not the kind of car I would want to drive on Monaco, for example. It's not the kind of car I would even want to use, ironically, on somewhere like Fuji. Fuji is a legendary track for top speed. Look at what the R92CP could do there. And yet, you need a car that can corner really well. It's a deceptive track in that way. And this, I just don't think would be a pleasant experience on a track like that. On Le Mans, it's fine. Big, wide open road, crazy top speeds, but not everywhere can be La Sarthe. So that's it for my thoughts. I could see him maybe still being controversial, because I could see some people loving the car, but I would love to hear why. If you do, maybe you could drop some tuning in the comments to help out other people who are finding it challenging. Either way, let me know. And of course, that brings all of my coverage of the new cars to an end. Overall, I would say it's a good update. Not a great one, but a good one. Having more vehicles is always good. A new track, even if it's not a track that I would have picked, still new is new. Some events, one collection book, that's a bit more underwhelming. 10 engine swaps is a nice addition instead of 5, plus it's not just the same engine in 10 different cars. So yeah, it's a good update, like I said. I think that if updates like this were more the norm, which at this point after the game's release would have been unlikely anyway, but if that had been the norm, then yeah, that would be pretty damn cool. As it stands, waiting this long for a new track and it finally being Eiger, well, that's always going to have a mixed response. Again, I'd love to hear your thoughts though, specifically on the car, but even beyond that to those other points. And of course, stick around on the channel for more GT content, and especially Gran Turismo 7 news. But for now, thanks for watching.